The Seahawks already have 2 Pro Bowl cornerbacks on their roster, so why not make it 3? I'll be diving into the possibility here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s listening in, whether you're in Salem, Oregon, or Des Moines, Iowa. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We are nearing the end of the final phase of Seattle's offseason program. They've got 2, not 3, 2 mandatory minicamp practices coming up on Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm going to be previewing what to watch in those final 2 off-season practices before the Seahawks head to spring break, before returning in late July for training camp. Plus, going to be diving into the possibility of Seattle potentially courting a 3rd Pro Bowl cornerback. Could it be in the works now that the Packers have released Jaire Alexander? I'll be diving in on a jam-packed episode, so let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. In what has been a saga that has lasted for more than a couple of months, really most of the offseason, the Packers finally moved on from cornerback Jaire Alexander, a 2-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time second-team All-Pro selection. He wasn't willing to take a pay cut. They couldn't find a suitor that was willing to trade for him with his current massive contract, so they decided to cut bait on Monday, releasing him and making him an unrestricted free agent. Now, this is a Seahawks podcast, so why is this a big deal? Well, as we've been talking about for most of the offseason, and especially since the draft when Seattle did not use a draft pick on a cornerback, they only signed 1 in free agency. They lost Trey Brown and Artie Burns. This has been a position that we have outlined episode after episode as a position that could potentially be one that the Seahawks are still looking to add. And we've seen the visits they've had. Shaquille Griffin, former Seahawks draft pick, he's met with them. They also met with Rasul Douglas, former Buffalo Bill, Green Bay Packer, Philadelphia Eagle, guy that's picked off a lot of passes. They've clearly been kicking the tires on corners. We even floated the idea of Jalen Ramsey potentially being a target, and that may still be what the Seahawks are most interested in doing. But the point is, when you look behind Woolen and Devon Witherspoon, there are questions depth-wise for the Seahawks. Josh Jobe was a revelation last year, but he was released by the Eagles at the end of training camp, and sometimes players like that are revelations have a tough time replicating that. He's on a 1-year contract too, so it's not like he is currently, at least, a long-term option for Seattle's secondary. Shamar Jean-Charles has mostly been a special teams guy in his career, aside from last year finally getting extended reps with the Saints. And Nehemiah Pritchett didn't do much when he played last year, really struggled when he was put into the lineup on defense. So you outlined the depth potential concerns. Now, I've been encouraged by what I've seen on the practice field, but until we get to training camp and until we get to the preseason, not really going to know necessarily what the Seahawks have there. None of those players have the resume that Jaire Alexander has coming from the Green Bay Packers, a former first-round pick out of Louisville. Alexander, when he has been healthy, and as I'll get to in a moment, that hasn't been near as much as what the Packers would have liked. But when he has been healthy, he has been a top 10 caliber boundary corner the last couple of seasons. It's not as if his productivity has dropped when he's been in the lineup. He only played in 7 games last year, and he had 2 interceptions. One of them he returned for a touchdown. The season before that, he played in 7 games and put up pretty good numbers with 6 pass breakups in those games. The year before that, the last time that he played more than 7 games, dating back to 2021, Jaire Alexander played in 16 games that year, and he was a second-team All-Pro selection, put up gaudy numbers in terms of interceptions and pass breakups, was among league leaders in both categories. He has been a really solid player the last couple of years when he's been healthy. And you look at the resume before that, 2020 was a second-team All-Pro. The guy has been really good at turning interceptions into turnovers, or into turnovers for points, I should say. He's been really good at getting pick sixes during his career. He has generally been a solid, not spectacular, but solid tackler. There's a lot to like about Jaire Alexander when he is in the lineup. And healthy, I think he's better than any of the Seahawks corners they have that aren't named Woolen or Devon Witherspoon. And you can make an argument when he's completely right that he might be better than Woolen is. And we haven't seen Devon Witherspoon elevate his game to being an elite player yet, at least statistically, though I think he has been much better than his numbers would suggest. My point is, Jaire Alexander has been as decorated as any corner that the Seahawks would have on their roster. And I think this would give Seattle potentially the best secondary, not just in the NFC, but the entire NFL. That, of course, is assuming that Jaire Alexander is healthy. And that's where the real problem lies here. And this is why the Green Bay Packers decided to cut bait. He had a cap hit north of $17 million. But 3 of the last 4 years, he has failed to even play in half the games that the Green Bay Packers played. The last 2 years, it was 7 games apiece. He had a healthy season with 16 games played in 2022. And the year before that, he played in 4 games. So you are looking at more than 30 games of regular season action that Jaire Alexander has missed over the course of the last 4 seasons. And there was some frustration in Green Bay last year when the Packers were getting ready to play the Seahawks, ironically enough. There was frustration in Green Bay's building in Titletown because they thought that he was going to be ready to return, and it turned out that he wasn't. They ended up having to sit him on injured reserve, and he missed the rest of the season. So there's been a lot of frustrations when it comes to durability and being available. And to me, the number one quality that an NFL player can have is availability. And Jaire Alexander has not been that for 3 of the past 4 years. So keeping that in mind, any team should be very cautious when it comes to approaching Jaire Alexander with anything more than an incentive-laden deal, in my opinion. If he's asking for significant money, which he should not be, Green Bay is going to be on the hook for a lot of money by releasing him. So he would be better off in this case getting a near vet minimum deal so he doesn't have much of that due money from Green Bay being offset. But there could be some incentives cooked in there because of this guy's ability and his talent level when he's been healthy. Again, last year he had 2 picks in 7 games. It's not like his performance has completely fallen off a cliff. When he's in uniform, when he suits up, he has been a really good player the last couple years. We just don't see him very much. So, of course, anytime you're looking at a player like that, there's going to be a hesitancy, and there should be. You have to look at the risk aversion part of this. You cannot go out and throw a bunch of money and get into a bidding war, and I don't think there's going to be. I think there will be plenty of teams that are interested in Jaire Alexander because of his resume and his talent, but the injury history the last 4 years, and particularly the last 2 where he has missed more than half the season, that is going to leave teams really cautious when it comes to putting much guaranteed money on the table. Incentive-based money is going to be where it's at. The escalators, I call them the Geno Smith package. We saw the last few years with Geno Smith. His weren't injury-related. It was, having assurance that he could back up that breakout season and come close to playing at that level. Again, in some ways he did. In this case, it's a player who's had injuries. So if Seattle is put in a position where other teams are offering a large chunk more than vet minimum, I don't think John Schneider is going to entertain this. With that being said, there may not be an executive in the NFL that works for any other team that has a better pulse on a player coming from the Green Bay Packers than John Schneider, formerly working for Green Bay before becoming the general manager of the Seahawks. He has a ton of connections in that building. If he has any questions about whether or not Jaire Alexander can still play and whether or not he would be a decent investment, he's got no shortage of connections in that building that he can talk to make that decision. So I'm not going to rule the possibility of this out. The fact the Seahawks have visited with Shaquille Griffin and Rasul Douglas already this offseason, they've made it clear by their actions that they have interest in looking at another veteran cornerback. And that's not even to say they're looking for somebody to supplant Josh Jobe. Maybe it's a competition-based thing. And Jaire Alexander, if he plays like he's capable of, is going to win that job. But he's got to stay healthy, and he's got to play at the level that he did previously. I think if you're looking at a vet minimum deal that's got some incentives baked in that could give him a decent chunk of money, I think it makes all the sense in the world for the Seahawks and the cap space that they have. And I think that Jaire Alexander would be a really good fit for what Mike Macdonald likes his cornerbacks to do. At minimum, you are going to have a really spicy competition between him and Josh Jobe. This could also be a case where Seattle signs him thinking, hey, he's going to be the starter unless he's not healthy. And the Seahawks may feel, look, Josh Jobe did good things for us last year, but we need a player who has the track record of all pros and Pro Bowls. We want to have the team be as good as possible, and that's not even taking a knock on Josh Jobe. You're always looking to improve your roster. So I don't know that this ends up happening. I could see Jaire Alexander trying to go to somebody like Minnesota or Chicago so that he can play the Packers twice a year. There's always that bad blood when players leave NFC North teams. They like to go to other NFC North teams if they have the ability to sign with whoever they want. Money's going to talk too, potentially here. But I would not rule out the possibility that Seattle would make this move. And I think it is a low risk, high reward signing. If it doesn't work out, that's why you aren't putting a ton of guaranteed money on the table. You've got Josh Jobe. You like Nehemiah Pritchett and Shamar Jean-Charles. But this is a player in Jaire Alexander who has been excellent for most of his career, at least when he's been healthy. He's only 28 years old. I don't think that it would be a bad move to bring him in as long as it is an incentive-based deal that doesn't have a ton of guaranteed money. If he's healthy, this does truly elevate an already great secondary potentially into being one of the very best in the National Football League. When I come back, we got mandatory minicamp set to kick off tomorrow. It's only going to be 2 practices, but still plenty to watch in those 2 sessions at the VMAC. I'm going to be diving into the offensive side of the ball, what I'm going to be watching specifically the next few days, coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Ever check your bank account and wonder where did all your money go? Between dining out, entertainment, and online shopping, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I first started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on pizza delivery. Now I'm budgeting smarter. I'm saving more money. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. You can manage your money with your partner, and it's smoother than ever. You share track and personal accounts, set goals, stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad as always to have all the 12s tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. For your second listen, don't forget to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. The NFL Draft is way in the rearview mirror, but roster moves and the news in general never stop. Hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. The Seahawks will finish off their off-season program this week. Originally, it was supposed to be a 3-day mandatory minicamp. It was announced this afternoon. However, just like last year, Mike Macdonald waited until after the second practice to make this announcement. But the Seahawks have already announced that they are not going to have a third practice for mandatory minicamp. So the final phase, there's only 2 practices left for the Seahawks before they are off for the summer. Get about 6 weeks and change before they come back for the start of training camp and the 2025 season. Even if it's one less practice, there's still plenty of things to watch the next couple of days at the VMAC, particularly on the offensive side of the football. And the first thing you always want to look at when you've got a new quarterback and you get a new offense, I'm going to continue to monitor the progress from Sam Darnold. I would be looking at the other quarterbacks as well, but Darnold in particular with this new receiving core. And looking back at what we saw in OTAs, it was 3 open practices, and fans made a big deal about the reports, and I was one of them. Look, Sam Darnold had a mixed bag practice on Monday. He threw some kind of ugly picks, but he also had some really good throws. I thought he had more complete practices on Wednesday and Thursday last week. I want to see gradual improvement because even though he's got familiarity with Clint Kubiak's offense to an extent and what he's going to be expected to do from playing for Kyle Shanahan a few years ago. Kubiak was the pass game coordinator on that staff. Kubiak is building his own offense. There's different terminologies, and you've got all brand new receivers that you are trying to learn this playbook and these new terminologies with. And so I want to see continued improvement, and we saw that last week from Darnold. There were still a few picks in those last couple of practices, but I thought he was more accurate. I thought he did a better job of the timing-based throws, getting the football out of his hands. That first practice, he held onto the football a lot, which I know that Clint Kubiak, that's the last thing he wants his quarterbacks to do in this timing-based system. So I want to see continued improvement here to cap off the offseason program here on Tuesday and Wednesday. I want to see a continued growth with the receivers. Cooper Kupp, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and even Marquez Valdes-Scantling. You are already seeing pretty strong connections that are being built there with Sam Darnold. Now are your rookies going to be able to catch up? Is Torrey Horton going to be able to do anything in these two practices? Where does Jarick Young fit in? Where does Steven Sims fit in? Where does Jake Bobo fit in? I thought Bobo had a fantastic week last week. Does he build off of that? So I'm looking at that chemistry and just the overall progression of the passing game in this offense. We can't really look at the run game this time of year, but you can figure out the timing-based stuff, the chemistry, the rapport quarterback and receivers have. That's going to be the first thing that I'm going to be watching. Second, that wide open right guard competition. And I know that there's always the caveat when you're looking at offseason practices. Wait a second, they have no pads on. They can't hit each other. There's no real blocking. So how can you really start assessing a competition on the offensive line? You have to look at the way guys attack drills. You've got to look at their movement, and you have to see the pecking order. And I know that that is the most elementary way of doing things, but last week, Christian Haynes got the majority of the first team reps at right guard. Anthony Bradford was the other one that rotated in. We didn't get to see Sataoa Lamea over there. Bryce Cabledew was only getting minimal work working with the third team offense. We didn't see him step up with those other units. What I want to see this week is if it's much the same in these last two practices before they go off to the summer break, or do we see Lamea, who played left guard last week, do we see him go back to the right side where he started 6 games last year? Do they thrust him into that competition a little bit at this point? Or do we see Bryce Cabledew? This could be a case, though, where John Benton's already got this zeroed in. Hey, I think Christian Haynes and Anthony Bradford are my two best options here. Let's see what we have there. And maybe Lamea plays back into that, but you've got him on the left side as the second string left guard behind first-round pick Gray Zabel. I feel like Zabel's already got that job in the bag. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong on that front, but he has been getting the vast majority of the reps with the first team. He's even been getting some with the second team. He's the 18th overall pick. This franchise loves him. He's come in attack mode. I think it's his job to lose. But right guard is, like Clint Kubiak said, very wide open. I just want to see where things stand these last two practices before we have this long break, because if they mix in some other guys there, then that tells you very much we haven't really gotten to the nitty-gritty yet. If we see Christian Haynes and Anthony Bradford, the two guys that competed for this job last year, if we see that those two guys are the ones that are getting the lion's share, all the reps with the first team offense, that would tell me that, yeah, this could change in training camp, but the Seahawks are honing in on those two guys being the ones that, particularly Haynes, who's getting most of the first team reps, at least at this point. You want him to win this job in this offense that's better suited for his athleticism, working with John Benton. So I just want to see what that pecking order looks like. And of course, watch the way that guys are hitting the sleds. As much as you can evaluate guys on the offensive line this time of year, you can't do much, but there's a few things that you can do. So of course, I'm going to be zeroing in on that right guard competition. And the last thing here, bubble players at skill positions. You can watch Jackson Smith and Jigba. You can watch Cooper Kupp. You can watch A.J. Barner. You can watch Ken Walker III. Those guys are going to be on the Seahawks roster in week 1. And so there's really no drama there. But when you start scrolling down the depth chart at running back, Kenny McIntosh played great late last season. But you've now got Damian Martinez to contend with, and George Halani's coming back. You're not going to get much to examine here in these minicamp practices without the pads on, but you're still going to be looking at some of the things that you can watch this time of year. How do guys handle catching the football? When they do the mental reps, how are they handling it? What do they look like in drill work? So far, that has been a position that everybody has looked pretty sharp. I really want to see in training camp, we get the pads on, you can actually start evaluating these guys. Where you're more so going to be able to continue your evaluation for bubble players, it's receiver and tight end. And I think right now you're looking at 2 or 3 spots behind Jackson Smith and Jigba, Cooper Kupp, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. You're looking at 2 or 3 spots that are going to be open depending on how many guys they keep for special teams purposes. And you've probably got 5 or 6 guys that are very much in the mix there. Derek Young and Jake Bobo and Cody White, those guys being returning players. You've got Torrey Horton, who you're hoping to see more action from as he gets healthier. Ricky White III, their other draft pick. Tyrone Broden is an undrafted guy that's made some plays that they like. Steven Sims is a really good return man and has made a few plays in the passing game. There's a lot of guys that are battling that legitimately are in the mix here for a spot on this roster. Special teams is going to be critical as part of that. But right now, it's taking advantage of all the reps that you get and making things happen on the field. And that's what Jake Bobo has been so good at since he first arrived a couple years ago as an undrafted rookie. So Bobo's very much going to be there. Derek Young, is he going to be healthy this week after landing on his shoulder last week, trying to make a diving catch? Going to be watching where that fits in because he has to be out on the field right now battling for reps because he is very much on the bubble with some of the additions the Seahawks have made. Cody White's a guy that shows up consistently. I just think this is a more competitive group than people realize. And it's not just because, oh, you just got a lot of bodies and you've lost DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I think they legitimately have a really solid receiving core there with some good football players that aren't going to make this roster. So that is going to be a position I'm watching. In tight end, Noah Fant, AJ Barner, those guys appear to be safe. Elijah Arroyo is safe as a second-round pick. Is there going to be a 4th tight end that ends up making this team? Is Eric Sauber going to justify it with him being a special teams guy? Or does Brady Russell start to work back at tight end as kind of that fullback tight end hybrid? I could see 4 tight ends potentially making this roster. But again, special teams is going to be a big part of it. So I'm going to be watching all of those bubble guys and continuing to evaluate where these puzzle pieces fit as the Seahawks draw closer to training camp and they try to figure out who's going to be on this roster when they battle the 49ers in early September. Up next, I'm going to shift gears over to the defensive side of the ball. There's plenty to watch on Mike Macdonald's side in these 2 mandatory minicamp practices. We'll be breaking down what I'm going to be watching on the defensive side of the ball coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s who are tuning in. Thanks, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen all 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support of the podcast. The Seahawks will be back in action to finish off their offseason program with a 2-day mandatory minicamp on Tuesday and Wednesday. And this will be the last we see of the Seahawks until the start of training camp. So last real look that we get until the pads start coming out late July, early August, and we really get a sense of where this football team is at. On defense, it's always tricky to evaluate players this time of year because you can't aggressively contest the football. You can't press in coverage. You can't tackle. You obviously can't work physically at the line of scrimmage. So we have a long ways to go until we're really going to know what we've got on defense from an evaluation standpoint. Still, I'm going to be watching the defensive line. This continues to be an area that I'm not going to say it's concerning necessarily, but you lose Roy Robertson Harris in free agency. You move on from a few of your other players that were reserves on the defensive line, and you don't draft any super big bodies aside from Riley Mills. More on that here in a second. You got to get more out of Mike Morris and Quentin Bohanna and Brandon Peely. Some of those guys are going to have to pick up the slack behind your big 3 of Jaron Reed, Leonard Williams, and Byron Murphy III. Those guys are going to be fantastic, but you have got to have better depth. And I think that that's going to be the thing to watch here is who's taking advantage of the reps they're getting, because plenty of these guys are getting opportunities. Who is stepping up and who is making a positive impression in terms of where they're lining up, when they're getting reps, how much they're moving up and down the line. There's a lot of different factors that you can look at this time of year. And I just feel like that's a position. Now, if Riley Mills is healthy for the start of the season, that changes things a little bit. And I mentioned this last week. Got to watch him doing some drill work where he was going about 50, 60%, getting off the football. That is not something I expected to see him doing at all right now. That is a positive sign to me. We're in early June that he's doing that. Now, we'll see where he's at a month and a half from now, but I think that this has a chance to potentially be a key storyline to keep an eye on, because if Riley Mills is able to keep progressing the way that he is, I think that changes things quite a bit depth-wise. This is a guy that's 290 pounds that can play multiple positions, can play defensive tackle, can play big end. I'm really curious to see where he fits into the equation there. And the fact that we might get a closer look earlier than we expected because he's ahead of progress. The Seahawks are not going to rush him, but clearly they've given him clearance to at least start doing some light stuff at practice. I think that is a really positive development for the Seahawks when it comes to depth on their defensive line. The second competition that I'm continuing to watch closely, Ernest Jones is going to be your starter. So is Tyrese Knight. The Seahawks don't have any drama there. And I think Drake Thomas is probably a near lock as the third linebacker on Seattle's depth chart. Where it gets interesting is after that point, because I think that you've got a number of players who really are about the same talent level, different years in the league. We haven't gotten to see what Patrick O'Connell can do beyond playing a few special team snaps in the regular season and being a preseason standout. We haven't gotten to see what he can do in regular season games on defense. Josh Ross, formerly playing for Mike Macdonald at Michigan, he has been mostly a special teams ace, not a guy that's gotten a lot of defensive snaps so far in his career, coming out of Michigan, Baltimore, and Seattle last year. So he's very much a guy that's on the bubble, because you're just wondering, is he a player that can help you if he has to be put on the field on defense? And I think that Derek Jackson's a player that is absolutely the wild card to watch here, the undrafted rookie out of Kentucky who's had some injuries, but he's looked pretty good here so far in the OTAs. He's been getting some opportunities to go on the field and show what he can do. He's a smooth mover. He drops back nicely in coverage, and we haven't got to see his tackling skills yet. He's got some pass rushing ability. They've blitzed him some. So Jackson is kind of that wild card to watch, but I look at that group of inside linebackers. You could even include Jamie Sheriff in there, because he's going to have that hybrid linebacker look. And if Seattle wants to keep him on the roster, that might be his pathway to doing so. He's been getting some off-ball work, and he's still been rushing off the edge, his natural position. That's kind of in vogue right now. Teams are looking for guys that can do both. Maybe Jamie Sheriff ends up being a guy that can do that. So I'm going to be watching that position group pretty closely from a reserve standpoint to see who's got the inside track once we get to training camp to get a roster spot. You would think the incumbents, guys like Drake Thomas and Patrick O'Connell, that they're going to have an advantage. But I think very much to watch out for Derek Jackson and maybe even Jamie Sheriff here because of the positional versatility. Those are guys to keep an eye on. And last but not least, let's hone in specifically on the safety position. Rather than saying, well, let's talk corners, as I mentioned earlier, there might still be some concerns at that position that could warrant signing somebody like a Jaire Alexander or Shaquille Griffin, or trading for a Jalen Ramsey. Those are still moves that could potentially happen because the Seahawks may have some concerns beyond their first couple of guys. And you do have some long-term questions. Rick Woolen's a free agent after this year. So is Josh Jobe. So is Shamar Jean-Charles. Like, they've got some questions beyond 2025. I think safety is just an incredible position for the Seattle Seahawks right now, though, in terms of you're going to have some really good players that do not make this football team. You're going to start with Julian Love and Kobe Bryant. Those two guys are still just starters. They're coming off really strong seasons. Nick Emenwari is an absolute specimen. He has looked really good out there in the field. They're going to be moving him around. The positional versatility, the rare athleticism, the production that he had as a tackler and in coverage. Mike Macdonald is going to find ways to get him on the field a lot as a rookie. Those three players, you are cementing your status as one of the best safety groups in the NFC. Then you add D'Anthony Bell, to the mix. And Bell, coming over from Cleveland on a 2-year deal, has mostly been a special teams guy for the Browns. But when he played on defense, he was productive. He had some interceptions. He had some pass breakups. He's 6'2", 209, so he can play some in the box. You can blitz him some. I think there might be a place for him in some sub packages when they are in certain dime packages or even 7 defensive backs. because he's got the size to play up in the box like a linebacker. That is a player that I think can find his way onto the field for the Seahawks, even after drafting Nick Emenwari. So D'Anthony Bell's got to watch. Jarek Reed, last year was really a wash for him. He came back in the second part of the season, but he had some injuries later in the year after returning from his ACL tear. Wasn't quite right. Mostly a special teams guy, had a lot of healthy scratches. I still think that he has a really high ceiling as a project free safety guy who also is a really good special teams player. So maybe he has a lead into a fifth safety spot on the roster. Oh, and by the way, Mike Macdonald really likes Ty Okada, and he has made plays in OTAs. This is a safety group that is just loaded with a lot of NFL caliber players. You've got 3 or 4 guys that can start in the league at that position. And Jarek Reed with development could be a fifth. I mean, they've just got riches at that safety position. It's really exciting to see how that spot has grown here for them, adding Emenwari, bringing in D'Anthony Bell. I just want to see what that pecking order continues to look like. Who's getting snaps, who's getting left out, because there's only so many snaps in these offseason practices to go around. And you've got 6, 7 players there that you are looking at, and maybe you can keep 5 of them. I'm just really fascinated to see how that position plays out over the course of the next couple of months. I want to watch these 2 practices just to see the continued usage of Emenwari, what they're doing with D'Anthony Bell, and some of the other safeties that they have on this roster. They're just loaded with NFL caliber talent. You can't keep 15 of them on your active roster, though. So I want to see what that rotation looks like and who's getting left out, who is seizing their opportunities in what I believe is the deepest position group. At minimum on defense, it might be the deepest position group on Seattle's roster. Honorable mention would go to running back there, but a running back still very much in the mix there as well. Seattle's got really exciting talent and depth at both of those positions. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL, and make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be rejoined by Rob Rang, and we will be diving into observations from day 1 of Seahawks mandatory minicamp. You won't want to miss a jam-packed Tuesday episode. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.